再び AT フィールドが君や他人を傷つけてもいいのかい？
構わない。でも僕の心の中にいる君たちは何？
希望なのよ。人は互いに分かり合えるかもしれないということの。
好きだという言葉とともにね。
だけどそれは見せかけなんだ。自分勝手な思い込みなんだ。祈りみたいなものなんだ。ずっと続くはずないんだ。いつかは裏切られるんだ。僕を見捨てるんだ。でも僕はもう一度会いたいと思った。その時の気持ちは本当だと思うから。
Neon Genesis Evangelion is a 25-year-old anime that is arguably one of the most impactful anime shows of all time, and to this day is still frequently analyzed and discussed. Why does Evangelion have such intellectual longevity? While I don't think there's one specific answer, I feel it is mostly due to Evangelion's honest and realistic depiction of the frustrating nature of our reality. Existence is seemingly a hopeless struggle for happiness and meaning, which drags on until eventually facing an abrupt and inevitable death. Evangelion illustrates the human encounter with this phenomenon through a psychoanalysis of the story's characters as they face this harsh reality with no meaningful purpose readily observable to them. The result of this realism is a work that offers a near endless amount of analysis and interpretation, which, like our own reality, does not conveniently come equipped with an optimistic answer to help us reconcile with our frustrating existence. As human beings, there is an innate desire to assign meaning and purpose to our lives. If there is no inherent meaning or purpose to our lives, what is even the point of living, let alone striving for a better life? This is a serious problem, though many claim to have a solution to this problem, ranging from finding some transcendent meaning found through religion, or discovering intrinsic meaning and purpose through our own individual actions. Whatever the solution may be, one thing is certain, in that there is a lack of empirical evidence pointing to inherent meaning in our universe, and this is what invokes our frantic search for a meaning. There then arises an internal conflict in a human caused by our evidently meaningless universe, clashing with our innate desire to live a meaningful existence. This conflict is known as the absurd. A helpful way to understand this concept is to look at one of the most famous works that illustrates the absurd, The Myth of Sisyphus by Albert Camus. This philosophical essay describes the punishment of King Sisyphus, a legendary figure in Greek mythology who is known for his deceit and craftiness. The details of the tale won't be discussed at length, but to summarize the story, Sisyphus managed to defy the gods and cheat death multiple times, till eventually his luck ran out, and he then received an eternal punishment from Hades. For his damning punishment, Sisyphus was to roll an immense boulder up a steep hill until he reached the top. However, upon reaching the top, this boulder would roll all the way back down the hill. This process would repeat ad infinitum. Struggle to roll the boulder up the steep hill. Boulder rolls back down the steep hill. Repeat. Now, what is the significance of this punishment, and what does this have to do with Evangelion? Well, this fictional punishment serves as an allegory for the absurd. Painstakingly rolling a heavy boulder up and down a hill with no end, therefore no purposeful reason to do so, depicts the human's tragic condition. Like Sisyphus, we strive for an end, a purpose. We work hard and struggle for the duration of our lives in the hopes that it amounts to something for a meaningful purpose. However, the universe does not respond and reward us with a meaningful purpose. Instead, we are left with nothing but the struggle, rolling the boulder up the hill tirelessly is seemingly all there is. This is the nature of our absurd reality, and Evangelion depicts moments parallel to Sisyphus' dilemma through character encounters with the absurd.
父さんもいないのになんでまた乗ってんだろう。 人に殴られてまで。綾波はなぜこれに乗るの？その喜びを反芻してこれから生きていくんだ。この言葉を信じたらこれからも生きていけるさ。自分を騙し続けて。みんなそうだよ。誰だってそうやって生きてるんだ。自分はこれでいいんだと思い続けて。でなければ生きていけないよ。僕が生きていくにはこの世界には辛いことが。
人は何？神様が作り出したもの。人は人が作り出したもの。私にあるものは命、心の入れ物、エントリープラグ。それは魂の座。これは誰？これは私。私は誰？私は何？私は何？私は何？
Now that we've established the existence of the absurd in Evangelion, before we can pose solutions to this phenomenon, how does one initially react to their first encounter with the absurd? I think this is a worthwhile question because if this reaction wasn't significantly negative, we may simply continue to happily roll the boulder up and down the hill with no need for a purpose. So again, what is the human's initial reaction with an encounter with the absurd? The most common response would be a moment of existential dread, or an existential crisis, which is how it is commonly referred to in modern day. Most of us have experienced this response ourselves, whether it arises when pondering our own mortality, or possibly through a moment of despair. These moments of existential dread that can be brought about spontaneously or through deep introspection are commonly accompanied by anxiety, depression, fear, mania, or loneliness. In Evangelion, moments that highlight this initial reaction of existential dread are not hard to come by.
ねえ、僕はこれからどこへ行けばいいんだ？美里さん、アスカ、綾波、当時、圭介、律子さん、カチさん、父さん、母さん、誰か教えてよ。どうしたらいいのか教えてよ。
パイロットの自我が持たんか。
The dread experienced by the characters of Evangelion may be exaggerated for effect, but is not so dissimilar to how we experience dread in our own reality. We have established that Evangelion takes place in an absurd reality, and this absurd reality leads to an initial reaction of existential dread. What is to be done in response not only to alleviate this dread, but to reconcile your existence with the absurd? There are three main responses to the absurd. The first and most common response is that one can make an irrational leap of faith into believing in a transcendent or spiritual realm beyond our absurd reality that itself has meaning beyond our comprehension. This leap of faith is most notably identified as a religious belief that is scientifically unprovable in our present realm of existence. This response is considered philosophical suicide by absurdist philosopher Albert Camus, and many other philosophers hold the same general opinion of this response. While it may allow a human to escape from the frustrating absurd state, this is at the price of settling for a delusional sense of reality, which may or may not lead to a sufficient feeling of purpose for some and almost certainly does not offer the transcendent meaning that the belief advertises. Seal's as well as Gendo's plans to initiate Third Impact and become God as means to achieving their own personal perception of transcendent happiness are the most relevant examples of philosophical suicide in Evangelion.
我々のアダム再生計画、通称 E 計画のひな形たるエヴァ0号機だよ。
神のプロトタイプか。
冬月、俺と一緒に人類の新たな歴史を作らないか。人は新たな世界へと進むべきなのです。 そのためのエヴァシリーズです。
我らは人の形を捨ててまでエヴァという名の箱舟に乗ることはない。
これは通過儀式なのだ。閉塞した人類が再生するための。
滅びの宿命は神聖の喜びでもある。
神も人も全ての生命が死をもってやがて一つになるために。
エヴァンゲリオン初号機パイロットも欠けた自我をもって人々の補完を。
三度の報いの時が。
The other response is simply suicide, a more complicated solution than you think. On one hand, annihilation of your own existence does allow you to escape the absurd condition, whereas the condition arises from meaning-seeking existence in a meaningless universe. Through annihilation, you no longer experience a meaning-seeking existence because you don't exist at all, therefore you escape the absurd. However, it can be argued that although you have escaped the absurd and the existential dread that comes along with it, you have not found meaning or even happiness. You've settled for nothing rather than continue the search for meaning. While maybe a way to escape existential dread, it is not a way to achieve meaning, true happiness, or transcendence. Therefore, it is not a sufficient solution for a meaning-seeking individual. Now, there is one more possible solution a human has to the absurd condition. The solution is called recognition, where one recognizes the absurd, accepts it for what it is, and continues to live in spite of it. What does this recognition even achieve? How can one become content within an absurd reality without either clinging onto an irrational belief system or escaping reality altogether? The answers to these questions will be discussed later through the analysis of Shinji's rejection of human instrumentality. The Human Instrumentality Project is the ultimate goal of the secret organization SEAL. Through initiation of the third impact, all human, Lilin, souls would be gathered into the Egg of Lilith, and this act would result in the instrumentality of humanity, a state of being where no human exists as an individual, and instead all of humanity would be unified into one singular being. This supposedly achieves a state of supreme happiness, transcending our humanity and effectively becoming God. This is quite the claim to make, so let's take a necessary look at SEAL's logic behind the Human Instrumentality Project. In the reality of Eva, it is revealed that every living thing with a soul possesses something called an AT field, an absolute terror field. This AT field serves as a physical barrier and defense mechanism for creatures such as angels and evangelions. However, for humans, it serves a much more psychological function. The ego and sense of self of a human is bound to that human and guarded off from others, making that human an individual. If an individual's AT field were to be destroyed or removed, that human would no longer be able to identify its own sense of self, its own identity, and would no longer exist as an individual at all. In the world of Eva, the loss of an AT field results in the soul of that human becoming pure LCL, link connect to liquid. Therefore, human instrumentality, in the process of unifying all of humanity into one singular being, removes the AT fields of each individual and effectively turns all human souls into a river of pure LCL.
Ikari, お前もユイ君に会えたのか?
So in summary, human instrumentality is removal of the psychological barriers that separate all human souls from each other, and then merging all these de-individualized human souls into one being. Why do we need to perform instrumentality? What's wrong with humanity existing as individuals with AT fields? Well, because the Human Instrumentality Committee believes that humanity is doomed in its current state. Humanity is weak, fear of failure, fear of not being loved, fear of other people, fear of being alone, etc. Therefore, human beings cannot be alone, cannot exist as individuals with only their sense of self, because then they'll continue to maintain this weakness and insecurity. Humans need the warmth, understanding, love, and reassurance from other human beings in order to remedy the insecurity in their hearts. When humans get close to each other, instead of nurturing the deep flaws mutually shared within each other, they only create more pain and conflict. Individuals that get too close together in an attempt to experience intimacy and remedy the deep-seated flaws that they carry are drawn back apart by conflict caused by these very same repulsive flaws and qualities. This concept is referred to as the Hedgehog's Dilemma, a psychological concept created by the philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer and popularized by famous psychologist Sigmund Freud, and is even cited within Evangelion itself.
あいつひょっとして友達いないんじゃないかしら。シンジ君ってどうも友達を作るのには不向きな性格かもしれないわね。山嵐のジレンマって話知ってる？山嵐？トゲトゲの？山嵐の場合、相手に自分のぬくもりを伝えたいと思っても、身を寄せれば寄せるほど体中のトゲでお互いを傷つけてしまう。人間にも同じことが言えるわ。今のシンジ君は心のどこかで痛みに怯えて臆病になってるんでしょう。
In Evangelion, this dilemma occurs because each AT field acts as a barrier for each individual's ego, effectively preventing us from understanding each other and drawing us back apart when we attempt to get too close. There are numerous occasions of Hedgehog's Dilemma being illustrated in Evangelion.
大丈夫ですよ。乗りますよ。
乗りたくないの？
そりゃそうでしょ。第一僕には向いてませんよ、そういうの。だけど、綾波や美里さんや律子さん。
いい加減にしなさいよ。人のことなんか関係ないでしょ。嫌ならここから出てきなさい。エヴァや私たちのことは全部忘れて元の生活に戻りなさい。あんたみたいな気持ちで乗られんのは迷惑よ。
自分だって子供のくせに。
Therefore, humans are simultaneously incapable of happily existing as individuals, nor can they comfort each other. Rather, when they get too close, they hurt each other. This is why humanity is doomed in the eyes of the instrumentality community, and why the instrumentality of humanity is necessary. Through instrumentality, the flaws of a soul will be complemented by the strengths of others, and vice versa, leading to a singular being without weakness, insecurity, pain, or fear. This process supposedly achieves a state of transcendent peace and happiness. Instrumentality begins during the last two episodes of the original Evangelion series, where the cases of Shinji, Asuka, Rei, Misato are all explored. The case of Shinji Ikari is the primary focus, so we'll use his case to clearly illustrate the process and result of human instrumentality. I won't go over every detail of Shinji's case, as it spans across 2 entire episodes and would take an excessive amount of time to analyze. So I'll just go through what I consider important realizations that help us give a clear picture of the full process of instrumentality. Shinji's instrumentality begins with him agonizing over the death of his friend Kawaru, who ironically he actually killed. He experiences a cognitive dissonance with his actions due to his closeness with Kawaru, and attempts to cope with his decision to kill him. First, he claims he had no choice in the matter. Kawaru was an angel, the enemy. If he didn't kill him, everyone would have died. However, Rei questions Shinji's true motivations, and this leads to him admitting he doesn't actually believe Kawaru deserved to die, let alone at his hand. Shinji would have even preferred to die in place of Kawaru. The string of questioning by Rei, Misato, and Asuka continues until finally we get to the crux of the issue. Why does Shinji continue to pilot the Eva?
褒めてくれる。大事にしてくれるんだ。嘘ね。あんたバカ？結局自分のためじゃないの。そうやってまたすぐに自分に言い訳してる。
そっかな。
他人のために頑張ってるんだと思うこと自体楽な生き方してるっていうのよ。
そうなのかな。
要するに寂しいのよ、シンジは。
masks the truth with convenient excuses until finally, with the help of merciless objections from Asuka, he arrives at the actual reasons for his actions. He pilots Eva because he's weak. He's afraid of being alone again, so he pilots Eva in order to be needed by others. If he's no longer needed by others, he may once again be alone. So he kills Kaworu not because he's the enemy, not because of some utilitarian morality, but because he's afraid that if he doesn't, he'll no longer be depended on by others, most of all his father, and will be cast aside, doomed to loneliness once again. As Shinji's instrumentality continues, his reasons for piloting the Eva are further elaborated on. Shinji eventually realizes he pilots Eva because it's the only thing that makes him valuable to others, which results in others praising him. He also hates himself, and is convinced that others hate him as well, so he clings onto the Eva because it's the only part of him that others value. And if he's valuable to others, he will receive praise and acceptance from them. In his mind, others stop hating him when he pilots the Eva, which makes him happy, so he continues to do so, despite subconsciously knowing that is a false happiness. The problem is that if Shinji continues to identify as an Eva pilot entirely, throwing away his true self, he will become dependent on piloting the Eva. There will be nothing to Shinji without the Eva. Even if Shinji were able to be a pilot forever, even if he continues to feel others don't hate him through their constant praise of his piloting abilities, he'll never understand himself, which is supposedly a prerequisite for loving yourself. So Shinji will continue to hate himself if he becomes dependent on the Eva, making the feeling he gets from praise a false happiness. So what can Shinji do instead to be happy?
ようやくお目覚めね、バカシンジ。
なんだ、アスカか。
遅刻遅刻。初日から遅刻じゃかなりやばいって感じだよね。
今の僕が僕そのものではない。いろんな僕自身があり得るんだ。そうだ。エヴァのパイロットではない僕もあり得るんだ。
After being shown this reality where Shinji is an Eva pilot, he realizes that his current perception of reality as ugly and painful is subjective, not an objective truth of reality. This holds true for his perception of others hating him, as part of his own subjective vision of reality. Furthermore, the Shinji that he is now isn't the entirety of himself, it's just the version of himself in this one world where he is an Eva pilot. So not only is his perception of reality as painful, subjective, and not necessarily true, but his own concept of Shinji Ikari is limited to this one life path. Therefore, Shinji concludes the world might not be such a bad place, and although he hates himself, if he's able to one day understand himself, maybe he can even learn to love himself. This realization completes Shinji's instrumentality.
僕はここにいたい。僕はここにいてもいいんだ。
However, even given the clear success of the project, is this version of transcendence enough? Is psychological tranquility and self-acceptance enough to escape the absurd phenomenon? The conclusion of Evangelion, End of Evangelion, depicts a series of events that lead up to the third impact and initiation of instrumentality. Seal's plan of starting and being in control of instrumentality, effectively becoming gods, is threatened by Gendo's own plan to betray Seal, gain control of instrumentality, and reunite with his wife Yui. Both scenarios are achieved through starting third impact. This leads to a violent war between NERV headquarters and Seal, who have ordered the Japanese military to infiltrate NERV and kill all NERV personnel. Gendo's plans are followed by Rei, who instead starts third impact herself by merging with Lilith and gives Shinji control over instrumentality. Shinji accepts instrumentality, rejecting existing reality, and an anti-AT field is created by Rei that dissolves all life into LCL. All human souls are merged into a single life form, and instrumentality begins. This is where the previously discussed instrumentality of Shinji takes place. However, after some deliberation with Rei and Kaworu, Shinji makes an important decision. Shinji realizes he would rather go back to existing as a flawed individual than to be part of the transcendent state of instrumentality. So Shinji rejects instrumentality and returns back to Earth as the individual Shinji. Why would living as an individual be preferable to a transcendent state of being? Well, because human instrumentality is not sufficient enough transcendence to complete the search for meaning and happiness. The project itself is a leap of faith, a form of philosophical suicide in response to the absurd. First off, feeling as though life has inherent meaning gives humans a sense of purpose. So if the humans of Evangelion continue to exist as deeply flawed individuals, the existence of a transcendent purpose would probably make life worthwhile anyways. But since this world does not have such an inherent purpose readily observable, Sion and Gendo make a leap of faith in the belief that the unification of human souls and the removal of AT fields will result in universal happiness and peace, and this would be sufficient enough transcendence. While this may lead to a sense of peace for humanity, it certainly does not transcend a meaningless reality, and only addresses the human condition at a psychological level. Therefore, human instrumentality is not a solution to the absurd, resulting in neither transcendent meaning or transcendent happiness. Shinji's decision to reject instrumentality can be viewed as recognition of the final response one may have to the absurd condition. The previously discussed myth of Sisyphus does not actually end with Sisyphus living in a state of eternal frustration. Rather, he eventually becomes conscious of his absurd condition, and instead of resorting to a philosophical suicide or suicide itself, he embraces his absurd condition. Through embracing the absurd itself, Sisyphus recognized his freedom through living in a world without objective meaning or morality, and was granted the opportunity to create his own personal meaning and purpose. But being conscious of the absurdity of seeking any inherent meaning in the universe, Sisyphus continues the search regardless, with the joy of the search for meaning itself, which in turn gives him the possibility of true meaning and happiness in his life. Shinji's rejection of instrumentality parallels Sisyphus' recognition of the absurd.
幸せがどこにあるのかまだわからない。だけどここにいて生まれてきてどうだったのかこれからも考え続ける。だけどそれも当たり前のことに何度も気づくだけなんだ。自分が自分でいるために。
Shinji states that by choosing to exist again, he'll be trapped in a frustrating cycle of misunderstanding how to achieve happiness. However, if enduring this cycle allows him to be an individual, that outweighs his frustration. Living as an individual and accepting that he doesn't know if he'll ever achieve happiness or not is preferable to the false transcendence and happiness of instrumentality. The peace and tranquility felt there is more similar to that of death and non-existence. So while yes, no pain is felt, happiness and meaning is not truly experienced either. At least by existing as an individual, he can experience the real feelings that are brought about by other individuals in his life, and have the possibility for achieving happiness. Accepting instrumentality is essentially giving up on any possibility for true happiness and purpose altogether. This is Shinji's reasoning for rejecting instrumentality. Instead of committing a leap of faith to a false transcendence, Shinji would rather recognize and accept his frustratingly absurd condition, where he can be an individual, experience the feelings brought about by others, and at least have the chance to search for true happiness and true meaning, accepting that it might never work out.